Ready?
I'm ready.
Okay.
Good, we're recording.
We're recording on YouTube.
All right, live?
Live.
Really, we're fancy.
High tech.
Yeah, great. Hello, everyone, members of the committee, members of the public, anyone listening. This is the meeting of the Municipal Building Study Committee for May 18th, 2021. And I'd like to call to order, start with the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. So we have three things on the agenda. I'd like a motion to take 3 and 5 together and move the library to the last discussion. Second?
Second.
Motion made and seconded. Anybody here from the public? No. On Zoom? No.
Not on the Zoom, but Mr. Gill.
Okay, so we have a motion by Chief McGee, seconded by Mr. McGee, to take items 3 and 5 out of order and discuss them next together. All those in favor? Roll call. Mr. McGee?
Aye.
Mr. McGee?
Yes.
Mr. Mullen? Yes? Okay. All right, so discussion of municipal building needs, along with creating an inventory of building needs with capital outlay committee. So before I belabor this too much, Robert, I know that we had talked in the past about building needs and you were compiling a database. I'm not sure how much you have that would help this committee, if anything. So I'd like your comments.
Yeah, so what I have is I have lost my file due to a hard drive going corrupt.
Okay.
So the latest that I have goes back to, I believe, the 2017 fiscal year, maybe 2018. I'd have to go find that file again, but I know our needs have changed. In there we had documented, it was mostly around improvements to both fire stations as well as to town hall, which we've subsequently revitalized Old Town Hall, obviously with all of you present there. And what it doesn't account for is the changes in the possessions of the town, the lot next door to town hall, and what we plan on doing there, or any of the other land usage and or facilities, including the possible movement of the highway department. Doesn't address any of that. It did account for the library and the remodeling of the library, but it's obviously in very broad strokes since that's such a large number, and there are a number of options still on the table for that. So from my point of view, I think what we're best off doing is essentially starting from scratch and building out a prioritized list of what the needs of the town are with regards to its buildings and land.
Okay, good. I agree. I actually don't go crazy. I know how electronic devices can be. So the file is gone, forget about it. I agree with starting fresh. I think we have a new committee. Certainly your input would be beneficial because you and I have had long discussions in the past about what needs are out there. So that can certainly be incorporated. So I think from the start, what I like to do is just agree on what buildings should be on the inventory list. And then we'll create a database. With that database, I want the committee to discuss what information we want on it. Certainly, I'm thinking year of construction, And then we break it out into different components. And this is, Robert, where you'll be instrumental from a capital perspective, is want to make sure we include things like roofs, heating and cooling. In some buildings like the highway garages and the police and fire stations, we have garage doors, which are essential to their functionality. So I'd like to create a list today so that we can put this into a database, agree on the inventory, agree on what the inventory should have on it as far as capital improvements. And then I'd like to disseminate the workload amongst the committee to go out and fill in all of the blanks that are on the database. I don't know if it sounds appropriate to everyone. And I think that would be obviously starting from scratch and then building a good quality database that we can use in seeing what buildings need the most and at what time.
Then we can sort it and everything by year, by type and all that.
Right. Does that sound like a fair?
Yeah.
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 Yeah. Okay. So if we want to start with the actual buildings, and I'd like to go geographically so our minds can follow the location. Of course, we'll start with Town Hall because that's the nucleus. We have Old Town Hall. We have Prime Time. We have the Segregated Schoolhouse. And because there's no building located on the new property we don't need to include 949. If the members of the public can join in, there's no building slated for the community garden, correct? Is it just going to be a garden?
Just
Okay.
the garden. Yeah.
Okay, thanks. Right, then we move down, we have the police station. We have the old police station, which is currently used by the highway department. Then we have the highway garage. We have the library. And then, of course, we have stations 1 and 2. And I'll be embarrassed if I missed any, but I think I got them all.
And do you need to include Lincoln Village, or is that?
That's Housing Authority.
Housing Authority.
So, and correct me if I'm wrong, school district is school department, water department is an enterprise fund, so they're separate. And Lincoln Village is housing department, so we don't have anything to do with those. Would everybody agree?
Do we want to include animal control
Oh, I'm sorry, I had that on my list. Yeah.
and whatever structures are at the transfer station that are also highway?
All right, so I did have animal shelter. I'm sorry, I missed that. And then we do have some structures at the transfer station. Thank you, Chief. You in agreement with that, Robert?
I can't think of anything else.
Okay. Okay, so moving on, what particular items do we want to identify as what we would think should be considered capital improvements? Because we know we're going to have some small ticket maintenance items on all of these buildings, but do we want to start at the top and then work our way down? So roof. And then we would go to exterior siding, because we do have some needs at Station 2 with some repointing.
Windows?
Windows.
Is there any structurally that need structural repairs?
Well, we should hope there aren't any, because I would close the building down, but yeah, we could put that on there. Yeah,
The general.
Yeah. Okay. All right, structural entrances and exits. Garage doors. Does that take care of the outside? How about sidewalks?
So hold on, Jim, anywhere in here, do we want to track ADA compliance measures?
Yeah, I was just getting to that with the sidewalks and the ramps. So, yeah. So sidewalks and ramps,
And parking lots.
okay? Do we want to loop that together or break them out? What do we think? Yes, Jocelyn?
Would that have been covered in the KMA audit?
It would, and I'm gonna reference that when we get to it, yes.
Exterior lighting associated with the walks and all that stuff.
So,
Do we just maybe do grounds and parking area?
Jim,
Yes,
if you're gonna, if I could suggest for some of those things like the ramps, the walkways, so forth, anything at all for, if you're gonna track different times when it was new construction or, you know, let's say there are renovations at different times, because some of that might make it easier to track and easier if some things need ADA renovations, it might not be as prohibitive to know that something was done 10 years ago and something else was done 4 years ago.
right,
So
okay.
I
I don't want to end up with a database, you know, that's too big, but I want to make sure we cover all the bases. You bring up a good point, Mr. McGee, because I think we should also talk about, seeing we're a green community, we should talk about whether or not we need any lighting upgrades. I know we just did some, so we covered that pretty in depth with our recent upgrades to lighting, and it was lighting, interior and exterior lighting fixtures we did, right? So, but there may be some buildings that didn't get done, so.
or there may be something that we could assess in the evening and see how well lit areas are.
Yeah, because there is a minimum lumens requirement for exterior areas. Okay,
So it's, lighting.
so anybody have any suggestions how we do we break them all out or do we loop them in? What's the thought?
Just my thought, but the entrances and exits, if we keep them more or less as doors, then have a category sidewalks, parking and walkways. Just a thought, then we can keep it asphalting and concrete type of categories together, and then have lighting be its own.
Okay, so sidewalks, parking and walkways, was that what you said, Mike?
Yeah, that's what I was saying. It's like, at least if we're classifying different types of projects.
Okay,
So like entrance, exits, garage doors, and windows could kind of all be the same.
okay,
Exits, windows and garage doors. Yep.
so we'll compare our notes, you and I, before we put this in, and then we'll send it out to the members to make sure that it hits all the bases we want. Okay. All right, sidewalks, parking area, walkways, and then we said exterior lighting.
Include that with sidewalks, ramps, and parking, or do you want that
I
separate?
think that should be separate.
Okay.
Yeah. Agreed?
Yeah, like, I was thinking, I mean, if we can, you know, combine a town hall lighting project with library lighting project, then we can just group it together and it's all classified together.
The nice thing is a lot of this stuff is done. We're starting from scratch, but
Yes.
we don't have boxes that we can't check. You know, there are
Yep.
things that are gonna be done, which is good.
Or date.
Right, exactly. So we can actually infill the date that it was done, right? So,
So I think that, it's my opinion, that roofing and siding should be separate because, the year that I've done roofs on the fire stations.
Right.
And I can give dates to those, but the siding and the pointing
pointing,
issues.
right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. And then you're saying lop in windows, exterior, entrance, exit doors and garage doors? Chief?
Windows, I was saying windows, entrance, exits, and garage doors the same. And
Okay,
then I was leaving sidewalks, ramps, and parking altogether.
okay,
Structural issues probably on its own if there was any
Yep.
kind of thing like that.
okay,
I don't see much of it, but it could, you never know. And then lighting on its own is how I have it.
okay. You on board with that, Robert?
Yeah, I'm fine with however we choose to track it. The key to all of this is to obviously have some sort of history, right? So that, for example, and I forget when we put the roofs in at the high school, but let's just call it 2015. If somewhere along the line, the school committee came back and said, we in another 10 years, we're looking at replacing the roof, we'd go back to this database and be able to say, hey, look, that roof's only 15 years old. Should either be, and we need to be really, religious about how we track things here too, because anytime we make an improvement, we're going to want to know how long that work is warranted for, and the expected life of that, because that expected life is what's going to help us to plan for funding of our capital outlay budget. So that, for example, if Station 1 needs a new roof, let's say 5 years from now, we need to start saving for that now if that's a high ticket item, right?
Right. So if I'm following you, then you think this committee should include the school buildings?
No,
And-
that was just an example that I was throwing out there. We don't need to, we shouldn't have to include that. Capital outlay has a school committee member who should be keeping us apprised of what their plans are, both short-term and long-term. So we shouldn't be hit with any surprises there. So the expectation from for capital outlay is our goal is to have a 5-year plan, but we'd love to be able to build it out to 10 years. And then anything from the school committee would be ingested in there as well, which should be all of our buildings, whether they're DES, DMS, or at the high school.
Okay, that sounds good.
Are you doing this in two different ways of thinking? Because most of these are all the buildings that we started the list. And then we start to say repairs. So is that the category of, so in other words, you've got this building and you didn't work to it, and then you gotta look at it again to see what repairs it needs. But then there's gonna be a situation where some of these buildings are gonna say, we can still try to say we can repair them, but they really need to be replaced, like the library or whatever. So if the library's on here, it doesn't look, we don't go over and look at it for repairs, right?
So, go ahead, Robert.
I was going to say there should be two different line items in the budget. One is there should be a line item for repairs, and then anything that is a replacement or a renovation would fall under capital. Repairs is one thing, and it should not be. What we did at Old Town Hall was not a repair. That's a renovation.
So when we were doing this, let's say at college or whatever, we would say, but that person still has to, you haven't declared it unlivable.
Right,
They still have to live in it and live in that place and work.
right.
So that category of repairs, you would put just enough repairs in there for them to work with the intent that building really needs to be, you're waiting for a budget, but yet the people still working there.
Okay, yeah, I see what you're saying. So I don't want to make this database confusing when people look at it. And I'm gonna go back to a real trivial, we used to have property cards, actually Carol still has them, where you look at this property card and it has a snapshot of everything you need to know about that property. I envision this to be the same way. Each town building will have its own card, and on it will indicate all the ages of these things that we're identifying and deficiencies. And then it's up to us to make recommendations once we put this together. This committee is going to meet regularly, probably at least once a month,
Yeah.
I would think, or maybe once a quarter. And then we're going to make, with Robert being involved, we'll make recommendations of what we think we should do for repairs, upgrades, or maybe replace the building, you know, just as you said. So yeah, that's what's gonna happen. This is just in its infancy. Okay?
Yeah, and Jim, I think there's also something that we should consider is, and I'm not sure how it's being done in the current budget process, is just looking at funding a building's maintenance and repair budget line item for specific to handle these types of issues. So tree comes down, knocks out, you know, some siding at Station 2. We're going to replace it and we would use that budget money for it.
So we do carry a line, and I don't want to speak for Mike because he's here, but we do carry a line in the selectmen's budget. And it's typically funded with at least $30,000 to $40,000 for items like that. And they do come up often. We had actually the accessible entrance at the police station was defunct. We needed to replace a motor there. We did that. That came out of that budget. We've had some repairs to your building, which, you know, were minor in nature, but so we do that now, Robert. But that's capped right now at somewhere between 30 and 40,000, which has been adequate in years past.
Yeah, for 22, that's gonna be funded at 35,000.
Okay.
And I have maintenance and repair lines in my own budget.
Right.
That I do my own garage door repairs, garage door PMs, and that type of stuff out of my own budget, just
Right.
speaking for my department.
Right. And I like that way because I don't think that anything that you need to keep your 24/7 operation functional should go through the selectmen. So I agree with that. That's just my opinion. So, all right. So the last thing then on the exterior, which was on my mind, but Jocelyn reiterated, is I think we should address the accessibility items that were brought up by the KMA report. And that report is all encompassing interior, exterior. So I think in the exterior and the interior portion, we'll have both reference to that report so that we can identify what needs to be done and have that on the building database as being something that needs to be addressed. Thoughts?
Would those issues be duplicative? So if there's a KMA category, just,
Well, I think,
sorry.
yeah, KMA was the company. I don't think it should be referenced as KMA. I think it should be.
Yeah, like accessibility needs, but a lot of those needs like could already be identified through entrances, exits, and sidewalks, parking, walkways.
It would, but I think it would behoove us, because we spent money on that report, to use that report as a reference. So my point, and I think what Jocelyn was alluding to, and tell me if I'm wrong, is that if we have something for town hall, and we have a portion of that report that's specific to town hall, that should be attached to that
Agreed.
property, so we know what the
I was
deficiencies are.
just thinking it would save a lot of your time.
Right, okay.
Is that what we're saying?
Yeah, I'm not disagreeing, like completely on board, but what if, like a ramp issue was already identified in the sidewalk, would we put it again, under accessibility needs, or would we just leave it out because it's already been identified?
I'm not sure I'm following you, I'm sorry. Make me understand what you're saying.
I think that it would be still left on our list, but you have a study that supports what's there, if I'm understanding what you're asking correctly.
Yes, okay, yes.
So we would still, whoever gets town hall to do the analysis of what it is, what years, whatever, you would list for instance, just throwing something out there, the ramp out front. And then you would attach the ADA study report to it, just to support that.
So like with every building, the KMA
Yes,
documentation is gonna follow that.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
That it's applicable to.
right, and then then after we compile this and we start to actually delve into what are we gonna tackle? It's all referenced by building. I think that makes perfect sense.
Jim, you're gonna want to be able to cross-reference this data as well, though, because if, for example, you need handrails at 6 out of these, whatever, 10, 12 buildings that we've identified, and we can buy in bulk and save ourselves $5,000, then we should be doing that.
Absolutely, I completely agree. I completely agree. Gee, now we're thinking with logic, imagine that.
Yeah.
Okay,
So it might behoove us to put a reference number or some such identifier for each of these categories, so that if there is a section in that report that we are going to fulfill by making that corrective action, that we could then be able to identify all such items related to that particular section of the report.
so you're saying code certain things so that if we query the document, it'll pick them all up? Is that what you're saying?
Yep.
Okay. I'm not an ace at Excel sheets or anything like that, so we'll have to get some support to do that.
See, Robert, we can do that simply by sorting, right? Sorting based on our railings or something like that, a keyword, correct?
Yeah, so let me, I believe Mr. Gale was one who sent out that report to the Financial Committee. So let me see if I can't get a quick review of that to figure out how we can break that down so that the members of this committee would be able to ascertain how to tag these items.
Okay,
If Robert needs me to, I'm happy to work with him to make it
okay,
compatible, because there are reference points, Robert, that you can use in the report that'll earmark it out. So whenever you're ready, reach out and we can put that together.
okay,
Thank you, I appreciate that.
beautiful. All right, so have we finished the exterior? Everybody in agreement that finished the exterior? Okay. Let's move on to interior.
Just really quick, do we want to, sorry, I spoke to, do we want to, like identify any, actually land improvements or needs?
On the exterior?
Yeah,
Um,
part of the property itself?
aesthetically, from an aesthetics perspective? Outside of any,
Yeah, like a land type of need.
okay,
Like it might not be aesthetic, I don't know, I'm just throwing it out there, do we want to have that as a category anyways?
I mean, I guess the only thing I can think of recently is your memorial, or something like that. Do we want to identify things like
It's like,
that?
well, like an underground storage tank, for example.
Okay, okay,
Well,
yeah,
how would that come out?
right. Okay, what would we classify that as?
Landscaping, beautification, that kind of stuff, I don't know.
That's not a bad idea either, because, you know, there are some beautiful town halls and stuff around, not that ours isn't, but they've done some really nice things with some town halls, so if we're going at it.
How about land improvement needs?
Land improvement needs, yeah, okay, I'm good with that. I already drew the line on my paper, Mike, come up with that
I know,
real
me
quicker,
too.
you know?
I did the same thing, I had to squeeze it in.
All right, so interior, why don't we do the same thing, go from the top down? So the first thing I can think of in an attic would be insulation requirements. Now, we did some insulation improvements, but not to every single building, so. How about insulation or weatherization? And then the next thing you think of is interior ceilings, or you just want to bulk that in with interior finishes?
I think finishes,
Okay,
we'll cover that way, you cover ceilings, walls,
okay,
right?
all right, so then why don't we do lighting first then?
This gets into a rabbit hole, like with HVAC, but venting or ducting.
I usually do that when I get to the basement, but yeah, I'm moving down the building, but yeah.
Well, sometimes it's in the attic,
Some of them are,
right?
right?
That's why I was talking about.
Okay. I love them.
Been too many town meetings.
Oh, God.
All right. All right, so we have lighting, interior finishes. I'd like to break out carpeting from interior finishes because that seems to always be forgotten.
Mhm.
Yeah, Jim, you might just want to call that flooring to keep it more general so that,
Yep.
you know, in the case of like where you're sitting now, if we ever had to refinish those floors, it could be covered there.
Good point, thank you. I don't know, Chief said furniture, I know it seems like it's a no-brainer, but some people have been working off the same desks for 20
It's
years.
capital, I mean, it's.
Yeah.
It's capital.
Well, so from a capital outlay perspective, if you're looking at replacing 1 or 2 desks, it's not really capital outlay. It should be part of your operating budget. What we're looking at is like when we do a renovation and we have to refurnish the entire part of that building. So yeah, I'm trying to think of something that we've talked about. Chief McGee, redoing the kitchen there at Fire Station 1. All those appliances, you know, those should be, if you had to replace something and you knew it and you stuck it in your budget, fine. But in the case of a renovation, that should just be a line item in the renovation, and capital would want to know about that. But really, from a capital outlay perspective, we only plan on our definition in the past, and I'm not saying that this won't change, but our definition in the past has been anything that's going to be over $10,000 and or have a life expectancy of greater than 5 years. Okay. But desks are some of those things that if you're looking to replace a desk like once every 2 years, and you've not saying that like the chief's desk, he doesn't need to replace that once every 2 years. He's going to be replacing that once every 10 years or something. You should be able to budget for that and put it in your normal operating budget. When you're talking about like town hall and the fact that there's, I don't know how many desks are there. If you budgeted to replace 1 desk, out of 10, you know, once a year, I mean, that gives you, and you put that into a cycle, you're talking $1,000 every single year in your budget for 1 desk replacement. We do it with computers, right?
Yeah, okay, all right, so
it should really be related to something that is bigger scale.
Robert, my desk's 15 years old, just so you know.
I'm not saying you don't need a new one.
I'm just picking on
and his
you.
old desk was handed down to the BSO, so. Yes, Jocelyn.
I have an original desk.
Do you? You beat us all.
Well, so Jocelyn, is that a historic item now and we can't get rid of it?
It might be subject to the bylaw. Okay. All right, so furniture.
What about counters? Especially dealing with accessibility.
Right, so, yeah, the next item, I would agree. I think it should be public service areas.
Yep.
And then we can address, again, referencing the KMA report, okay? So I'm gonna put attach accessibility report right after that. Okay, so I think it's appropriate to put heating and cooling systems. And then I want to expand on that just a little bit. And the expansion I want to discuss is sort of a maintenance item, but I think it should be captured in this, or at least discussed. Vent cleaning, ductwork cleaning, which is obviously crucial to the interior air quality. So right now, we just started doing it. But I don't know if I want to skew too much off of capital needs versus maintenance. Maybe I should look at that separately. What's the thought of the board, the committee?
For the cleaning, what did you say, 35,000 a year for what?
Yeah, that's specifically for items like this. Maybe we can just identify if ductwork is present. How's that?
Yeah.
In this report?
In each building.
In each building. So if there's ductwork present in each building, it'll be on here, and then I can capture it from a facilities perspective and say, okay, now we need to put a maintenance plan in place. Okay?
Yes, maybe there's a rotating plan, just like the replacement of computers or desks.
Right. Okay.
Yeah, I think you definitely need to capture that, because that maintenance plan should factor into any type of decision making that goes into replacing our heating and cooling methods. So if we have a smaller building, is it smarter for us to put in mini splits as opposed to replacing a full blown HVAC system?
Yeah, and we have been doing that, Rob, and I think you're aware of that. We have been exploring and installing mini split type units. This building in particular has them. There is a bit of a hybrid. We still have one gas-fired unit here, but we are using it. We are taking advantage of that technology, I should say. I'm also working with Karen Brady right now for a Green Communities project to change the ACO shelter into a mini split type system. Because right now we're on an old heat pump style system, which is using an absorbent amount of energy. So we are doing that. There is work, there is progress, but this needs to happen for us to do it the right way. So.
Right.
Okay, so back to the interior, we captured the public service areas, KMA reporting, heating, cooling system, and then of course the question is ductwork present. What else?
Any electrical needs?
Electrical upgrades or a condition of electric? You can go ahead and say plumbing needs as well. And then one of the biggest ticket items we can talk about is restroom facilities. So restrooms, those are expensive. So that's definitely something that we would want to plan for. Anybody have any other suggestions? No? Think that covers it?
Yeah, you get a good start on it. Once you get in there, once you get the building, whatever data you have, for instance, if you said to me, Mr. McGee, if you go into Well, I wouldn't even want to sit in the town hall or have a big conference. It'd be a waste of my time to try to assess this without talking to you guys.
Right,
To know what you've done.
right,
So in order to get it more effective and efficient, I would want to start off on a smaller building and say, if somebody's got the data, when we get back together on the next meeting, if there is data out there that you have already in plan, that you already looked a lot of things over, and then of these items, then I don't have to wait for the kind of come back. If you remember to look at it because you need this, and you say, oh yeah, that's on the list.
how about this suggestion? If we did 2 buildings at each meeting, it would take us 6 months to complete the list.
It's what, November?
I mean, this isn't gonna happen overnight, it hasn't been done in 5.
No, I don't think that's a bad. And then we
You
would
raise a
have
good
things-
point, because
yeah.
I think everybody collectively can input,
Yeah.
and we can, of course, with my database, which I have at my fingertips, I can tell you when permits were pulled, when things were done, things like that.
And once you've done that, and if there's questions about it, then you can say to the kid to get out there and double check.
Right,
And then look and see what else you can find.
right,
Okay, on the general listing that was developed based on today's conversation.
right.
And the knowledge I would have from experience of actually doing this kind of stuff.
All right.
So,
So does that make sense, or?
If you wanted to do, I wouldn't be opposed to doing my own 2 buildings.
Okay,
I mean, I have all the files on everything that's been done historically.
okay,
And some pretty close dates that I could probably confer with you on to just
Okay.
check for accuracy. So I wouldn't be opposed to doing the 2 fire stations with you if you want to do 2
All
other
right.
buildings along with them.
all right, so let's not belabor this, let's not overthink it, it'll work out, and I think it'll
Yeah.
take us,
yeah.
it'll take us a few months to get it done, maybe 6 months at most to get it done. Okay,
Yeah, and the good thing, like in this, like Mr. McGee mentioned, a lot of this information really was for you, so we'll just rely on you.
yeah, and Nancy, Nancy can be tasked off with most of that if we give her a list of what we want, so, okay. All right, good, that's excellent, thank you, progress.
I have a question.
Yes,
On these buildings, are you gonna note like any historical importance? Like the St. Gans's Schoolhouse, for instance, this building, the library. And eventually, some of our other buildings are also gonna be old enough to be considered historic, even though we don't think that way.
Sure.
Like
So why
fire stations might at some point.
so why don't we just, on the card, we say, is this building historically significant? Is that,
Yep,
Yeah,
yeah, just so
okay.
there's a notation on it.
Makes
okay,
sense.
And Jim, I could-
it's relevant, so thank you for bringing that up.
And I could check the database, the NAPS database, and see if there are forms. I know that there's one for here. St. Gans's, and I think there's one for the fire station in North Dayton, I'm not sure.
Okay,
And I can just make sure we have
Yeah.
that information.
yeah, thank you. Okay, that's great. All right. So that takes care of 3 and 4. Thank you for combining those. You can see why I did that. They need to be talked about together. All right, number 4. The moment we've all been waiting for. Let's talk about the library. So I want to split this up into 2 discussions in the same.
3 and 5, right?
3 and 5, I'm sorry, 3 and 5. I'm sorry.
That's okay.
I'd like to discuss this in 2 fronts. I'd like to discuss the library. I'd like to discuss the building that the library currently resides, because I think they need to be talked about independently. Because saving the library and saving the building might not happen at the same place. So, and I think that's important to realize. So we have the library currently in a Carnegie donated structure, which dates back to when?
1910.
1910. In 1920, according to a librarian,
Annual town report.
annual town report said that the library outgrew its current facility. So just like Dayton, to be talking about it 100 years later, that this building is still occupied by the library. But I think it's time to have a heart-to-heart, and like you say, Mike, a coming to Jesus moment, and say, what are we gonna do? Because it's finally time to do something with the library. I have a little more experience from a public safety perspective. When I came to town, I was bewildered when I walked in that building. The previous fire chief and I worked to put a fire alarm system in the building, which made us feel a little better about it. But it's never been, it's never been easy. During the pandemic, the current chief, Chief McGee, and I both decided that we're not going to allow it to reopen unless we address some of these issues. So I think in saving the building, we're going to work towards allowing the main level of the building, the library, to be open. But I think we really need to have a linear thought process as to what the library needs are and where the library should reside. Can it go somewhere temporarily? Can it move somewhere permanently? But I feel strongly that the library and that building have outgrown one another long ago. And we need to think about other alternatives for the library. And then what can we do to the building in the interim to help the library, but also help the longevity of that building? So we want to have those two discussions, and I would really like to stay hyper-focused and have this committee come up with a couple of set of recommendations on both fronts, for the library and for the building, and get that to the selectmen so we can move on some resolute for both of these problems. Because I know if we decide that the library shouldn't stay there and the library needs to move, okay, we need to discuss where is it going to go. And then I know the vacuum that's going to be created is, what do we do with the building that's empty now? And we need to have an answer for that, or else the taxpayers aren't going to support it. And I think everybody wants to do the right thing, but it's our charge to make sure we have a plan in place when we're asked the questions. So that,
if I may, Jim?
yes.
Currently, we have money approved at a town meeting to do some accessibility upgrades to the building. And mostly that was to, correct me if I'm wrong, make the two means of egress that are largely required by you and I. If this is going to remain a town building, whatever is occupying it in the future, I think that those items still need to be addressed.
Correct.
So there's money there to do that. I'm of the personal opinion, and Jocelyn will probably throw something at me, but I don't think that, in seeing what went on there before the pandemic, that it's the right place for the library to go back to. That's just my own personal opinion. When I first walked into that building, when I took over as chief, it just scared the heck out of me to think that there was kids in the basement and there's a bulkhead or whatever as a means out, and then a scary as heck stairwell as a secondary. And I just think we need to really be looking at where can we put our library on a temporary basis until we can get a permanent resolution.
Okay. I agree with you. So why don't we roll with that discussion? And I don't think this needs to be in the form of a vote. And Robert, I want your input because you've had a lot of history talking about this topic too. Can we all agree that the library and its current space or building it occupies is not conducive with the needs of the library?
I agree.
Yeah, I'm in agreement with that.
Mr. McGee?
Isn't that agreed to a long time ago?
Not necessarily, no.
No, I mean, now with all that big study and everybody, agreed. that-
Yeah, but there's been no support to put a new building up for the library, so that's why it remains where it is.
Doesn't mean that you don't need a new library.
Right.
Right.
So all I'm saying is that what we're gonna do is say, you're gonna put a ramp, so they can open and still be viable for just the main floor. So you've got that figure. So
Right.
that's gives you a little time here, but you're saying already the next thing is that, yeah, maybe not even in that same location, but I thought it was a no-brainer that in the future, the library was gonna be still there and new somewhere. I know they didn't have the budget, because it was, I remember $5 million or something, or.
It was more than that.
It started with, they only gonna have 1.2 million, and then the estimated cost was 5 to 7 or something, and then that ended, I guess, right? So
It
it's
did.
got the whole thing.
So it's happened twice now, since I've been here, right?
Okay.
I was involved in the first
Okay.
stuff at the library, so for a long time, the issues that you are talking about with that building have been recognized by, like, the trustees, the library building people, the patrons, the library supporters. The problem that we've gotten state grants, you know, we get 2, 3 of them. And it's the third one.
This is the third one now.
You know, so there's a support there, but every time it went to town meeting or for a town vote, that's when it got shut down. The townspeople said, no, we couldn't afford it. Sometimes it was because we needed a police or a fire station more, there was, you know, that always came out. So it's a long time need, and I think that was 20 years ago.
Right.
The first time was in the 90s.
Yeah.
When I first got involved. It was 2005-ish, around the first, like when I got here in 2008, when the whole economy crashed,
Right.
was when we made the second. Well, there was an attempt before me, but then when I got here, we made a final push. And then, you know, now we're in a pandemic, so.
Right. Okay, so, and that's the point I'm trying to make. I want to come up with a plan that is tangible, and that we, just like when we went to the townspeople about the money for the ramp and the bathroom, it was not for the library, and I don't mean this with any sense of offense. It was to save that building and make the building accessible.
Correct.
I think the plan going forward for the library, and this is just my opine, is that we need to get out of the $6, $7, $8 million building, new building, and we need to find out, is there something else we can do to the library to get it out of that building? Because we feel strongly about this. And move somewhere else, either temporarily, or can you move somewhere else and scrap the idea of a new building and move somewhere permanently that hits all the buttons, except it's not a new building. So there's only 2 options for that. It's moving you to another building in town, municipal building, or it's leasing a space for the library. So those are the 2 options that I can see. So, yes, Jonathan.
Can I ask, first of all, what was the amount that was approved at town meeting for the ramp and for the?
105,000.
Okay, so let me throw something in here just for the mix for a minute. And Mr. Chairman, this may be things we can talk about and have a conversation about how ways to go with this or around this too. In order to do modifications to the building for a ramp or even for an accessible lavatory, one of the things that has to be looked at is something you made reference to earlier, and that's the card. You have to look at the property card. In looking at the property card of the property card of the building values the building. It's not the value of the land, it's the building. The building is valued, according to the property card, at $308,400. So keep that figure in mind for a minute, the 308.4. If the total construction or temporary construction is under 30% of that value, which is $92,000 approximately, I don't have the change, but it's 92 and change, then that building potentially, with the modifications that I talked about, including a few others, such as the, obviously the ramp and one of the doorways and so forth, and the restroom, might meet ADA criteria from the state. Once you go above that 30% threshold, at $92,000, then there's other obligations that kick in, and the town is obligated by state and federal statutes of 2006 to have to make that library fully accessible. And when you do that, then you get into the other doorway, if you will, or the other area of rest, which it may not have a ramp, but it has to be accessible. Then you get into the shelving, then you get into the tables, et cetera, et cetera. So it opens up a whole nother aspect. Now, other aspects of this also are potentially considering the date of when the building was built, and that this hasn't been any reconstruction. I don't believe the building's on the State's Historical Society. So because of the type of building it is, for example, it's possible to potentially petition the state temporarily through the Architectural Access Board for some variances. But there's no guarantee on the variances at this point. And considering when the library needs to be reopened, and that's something that Jocelyn can address, it may make more sense to temporarily, going back to what Chairman was talking about, look at transferring some of the services or resources of the library temporarily, rather than considering that temporary reconstruction. Because as it stands now, and again, we don't, as far as I know, we don't have an engineering report yet. And I haven't spoken to engineers yet, and I know, Mr. Chairman, you and I haven't spoken about it yet either. But the potential is there that if this figure exceeds that $92,000 mark, for example, as I said, that's the first thing that kicks in, and that changes the entire accessibility component of the library. So I just want to, you know, the devil's in the details of everything that gets discussed and done as this goes forward. And this is one of those details that I think really has to be considered and looked at. Because even if it's done, if it doesn't meet that criteria, the state may not certify the library. So I'll leave that out there for now, but I just wanted to get that out there so that everybody's aware of where that is part of the component stands.
Okay.
Can I ask you a question?
Yes.
I'm sorry, Joe.
Go ahead.
If that building is not used as a library, does that same criteria kick in?
Once, because it's a town building, once you do any reconstruction within the library or modification, that same formula still applies.
No matter what the building needs to be
Because it's
for?
a public building, yes.
Yeah, thank you for your input. There are a lot of exceptions for historical structures. I agree with you. It's not currently listed on any historical list, state listings, but it is still an historical structure.
It is on the Massachusetts MAPRS, the database. It's the form does need to be updated. You and I had talked about the National Register. And in order to qualify for such things, to be listed, the updates to the information would have to be added. But it is on their database as an historic building.
Yeah, it's an inventory.
It's an inventory.
And Mr. Chairman, I agree with you. It's just a question of whether or not these are things that can be done potentially and get any waivers that we need for variances that may be needed in the time that's allotted right now for the library to reopen.
Right. So I agree that the town has made an effort to be as compliant as possible with all of our buildings, but I'm also aware, being a building official for 17 years now, that the State Architectural Access Board is extremely lenient on historically significant structures. I've been to them for variances on a few occasions, both publicly and privately. And they have always been in the affirmative to save a historical building. So I appreciate the input. We'll keep that in mind. But I do think we'll be able to do what we need to do, irregardless of the statute. That said, you raise a very, very good point. It would be a lot more expensive to make that building fully compliant, even if we decided to do that, irregardless of what the state said, being occupied by a library versus another use which would benefit from the building itself, such as maybe the Historical Commission,
I'm so glad you said that.
the VSO. I think it would be great for veterans to visit that building. So there are a multitude of things that we could use that building for. And if we did bring the entire building up to compliancy with the AB, it would be a lot less expensive to do that than a library building. So we just don't have any square footage there, and that's the problem. Jocelyn will end up with 3 bookshelves, so. I don't wanna take up the whole afternoon, but I do wanna try to make some progress, so. I think we can all agree that the library needs a new place to call home. The taxpayers have made it clear that they won't support a new building. So do we explore other options? What other buildings are available that the town could make available to the library? And I wanna make this clear. Jocelyn's been very patient and her staff has been very patient ever since I've been around and long before I was here. They don't deserve to be thrown somewhere just because, it checks off a couple of boxes. I think we need to really think about this and make a plan that's fitting to the library, fitting to the people who use the library, fitting to the town, and makes sense to the taxpayer. So I know that's a difficult charge, but we're all smart people, and I think we can come up with a plan to bring to the selectmen based on facts and functionality.
Can I just add the time constraint?
Yes.
Yeah.
I haven't mentioned. The Mass Board of Library Commissioners is most likely going to require that, I can only imagine now with the governor announcing that COVID is over, pretty much, but the libraries be open by Labor Day back to their pre-pandemic hours. I don't know if things will change since the governor has lifted his restrictions earlier, but I have this target in mind. And I'm hoping it doesn't shift earlier, but. So I just, I needed to make that. I think most of you know that,
So you're cracking the whip.
I'm in trouble.
So. What buildings do we have that are available, number one?
Perfect. That was where I was going.
As far as I know, none. But with that said, what is, Mr. Administrator, what is the plans for COA, prime time, and that type of thing?
So,
And I know historically, Jim knows, historically, we've had these conversations in the past. And Jocelyn, I believe, was present for the conversations, and it wasn't well received. It may be a hard decision that yourself and the Board of Selectmen need to look at.
So I'm in agreement with that, Chief. However, Jocelyn and I had a very productive discussion last week via telephone, and I asked her to tell me what she needs. And I won't speak for you, you can bring those up because you're here. But with respect to the COA building, one of the biggest concerns is the weight that will be distributed on the floor system with the books. That building cannot support the weight of the floor of the books and associated fixtures. That is repurposed trailers that were, I believe, attached to the middle school back in the day, correct?
They were kindergarten class.
Kindergarten class, okay. So there's actually a crawl space under that building. So the dead load and live load allowances for that structure do not go anywhere near what's required for the library. So I think it's worth discussing what the chief brought up, but we would have to do some significant reinforcing to the floor system in order to accommodate the needs of the library.
The money, when John said, 90,000, you were thinking of going in there to the existing library, allowing her to be open just for the main floor by building a ramp, 150,000, whatever you said, and then you triggered the 92,000 base. So that was gonna get her in to start, that you're gonna have this done, expected, I guess, by the start of when she needs to open.
Fairly close.
Fairly close,
Yeah.
right? So that was gonna be like one until there's a little twist here. the other thing is that, is there a possibility of blanketing this whole town and asking people where structurally or where is this space that 150,000 could be, you could lease for a library, whether you call it temporary or maybe for longer, you know. But we're in this town with all the buildings that are not municipal buildings, but town, you know. Yeah, you know, is there somebody that would lease a space that's vacant? And it wouldn't be a big deal, it could maybe handle the load, you know, and then at $150,000, you would be spending the money for a lease agreement for, I don't know how long, I just throwing it out there.
Can I ask the same, similar to what you're talking about now? And I know that you talked about trailers earlier. Are there modern trailers now that, you know, like double wide, triple wide trailer that could be potentially rented, that would hold that could handle that weight, that could go, for example, in that spot where the building, the house was just torn down temporarily?
So it's a good question. The problem with that is it leads to my comment about moving, it's a lateral or almost backwards move for the library. And one at significant costs. The trailers that you're referring, we have several on the elementary school. I believe there are 8, Chief. Were there 8 used to make that? The cost was $1 million for those 8 units. And Robert, you probably know that because you were part of it. So it's a significant cost, and in the end, you still have a trailer housing the library, which raises a lot of questions. First of all, I don't think it's a permanent solution for the library. I think it's too costly to be a temporary solution for the library. But then you also have the accessibility problems with the library because you have trailers. So in the school, we kind of married them up to the existing first floor level, which sort of all worked out in sort of a symbiotic way. Placing them there new, and I know this firsthand because we did it at the ACO building, where we had to chase the grade in order to get a ramp that would work, et cetera, et cetera. So it's difficult to have trailers become accessible, especially one, you would end up needing 3 or 4 of them in order to increase the size of your square footage. If we just do simple math, that would be $500,000. So I don't know if that's tangible or not.
What is roughly the square footage needs if you were to get everything out of the basement and look for a place to do?
Do you want to use this opportunity to tell, you did it so eloquently last week when you went down your list to me. Do you want to?
Of my needs?
Of your needs,
or-
yeah.
Well, I'd like to have, well, we don't have right now, but children's space. We lost our teen space. We have, we don't really have room for people to sit. Our internet computers are right over here. I'd like to have space for the processing of books. The public service area to check out books. I'd like sight lines so that anyone who is staffing the public service area could be able to see the kind of monitor our.
So that's an open floor plan.
So those are all the needs. Okay, so you walk into this and you're in this room. Is it big enough?
This room,
This room. Is it big enough?
I'd have to see a layout. I'd have to see it.
Yeah, that's the point.
So,
Because I'm thinking of our shelves and with their, I mean, with the things that we have in our library, it probably is, but is that enough is that really serving our, right, if I bring the stuff from upstairs, probably not.
so when you, I put some thought into this, okay?
Yeah.
So when you include the accessibility requirements for the aisle widths, the book locations, the reception area, the restrooms, et cetera, Jocelyn needs about 6,000 square feet.
So from that door, when you come in, this space.
And that's double the size of the library. Like if we were to go up 3 more floors, not end to
Yeah, I
end.
think that's what I'm.
This is only 1,600 square feet,
This is only 1,600,
Yes.
this whole
this whole space.
space, and give you some kind of feeling.
Right, so you would need a space 3 to 4 times the size of this, right?
So if you were gonna go out, if you were gonna say, well, you know, blanket the, I don't know how you advertise, looking, Don Dayton is looking for a space that they could use for, you know. You'd be looking for 6,000 square feet, you think?
Or something thereof, yeah. I don't know if you'll have a space suited particularly, but there are several buildings in this town that could accommodate that request. So do we want to make that recommendation? You know, if we don't have a building that they can go to, we've just discussed that it may be too costly to buy something or lease something temporarily because of the logistics. Do we recommend that they need to move, but they need to move to a lease space? And if they do, is it temporarily until they can build this building? Or do we do a long-term lease? Or do we recommend a long-term lease and have it make their permanent home?
Yeah.
It's not an easy, there's no easy answer, but we need to have this discussion.
Do you, Mr. Chairman, have an idea of the private space in town that might, I know you said you might, I'm sure you have a pretty good idea of what that inventory is. But then the second question is, even with that inventory for a long-term lease, how many of those spaces right now are accessible, or what would the expense be to make them accessible?
Good question. There are 3 buildings that I can think of that could accommodate a 5,000 to 6,000 square foot need by the library. I believe 2 of them are currently accessible. The third one, I don't believe is accessible, but because there are no public spaces in this building right now, it's all private leases. But I don't want to speak for that landowner. I don't think it's accessible. So the answer to your question is there's at least 2 that are accessible.
Okay.
Fully accessible.
So then the other question, becomes if we go the lease route, to pursue, we still have a Labor Day deadline. You know, to keep our accreditation, what do we do as a contingency in the meantime?
Another good question. So I don't even know, with the current construction climate right now and how busy everyone is, I don't even know if all the stars aligned, if we could get the ramp and other related construction done at the library by that date. I don't even know if that's tangible anymore.
Yep.
So I have a town electrician under contract and it takes him a week to get here sometimes. That's just how it is right now.
Oh, no,
Everybody is straight out. By the same token, if you find leased space, that landowner, building owner is going to have a similar problem, right?
Yeah.
So I do think that this requires an intermediary.
Very short term, and
right.
then longer term.
And then, right, so what can we do to help you meet the deadline of Labor Day while working on the bigger picture, which is finding you either a semi-permanent or permanent home? Go ahead.
Can I ask?
Go ahead, yeah, go ahead.
Is there any flexibility with the library, whatever it's called, as far as if you showed them or provided them proof that we're trying to move forward with something to delay that Labor Day?
I have to get more information. The person I talked to sounded hard and fast. Maybe I'll try to get more information.
Again, I'm wondering if we showed that there was a mitigation plan in the works, as along with why it can't be reopened at this point, if that would be
I
something.
mean, they haven't announced anything yet
Is-
formally. I'll know more next week when the commissioners meet. Maybe I can attend that meeting as part of the public and just plead our case if you think that's wise. I don't know.
Is the person you're referring to who gave you this hotline answer or comment discussion, Do they know the history of what the library's gone through?
Everyone there knows.
Okay.
the history.
So they could be doing that to say,
What's that? Yeah.
should I get off the pot diet, right?
No,
So-
no, I don't know, I don't even remember who I was telling, I don't know, it might have been at the selectmen's meeting, I don't know if they're going to be faced with a lot of resistance from librarians who may not be, I don't know about, in the fall, but resistance with other municipalities who haven't funded libraries and not willing to open. There's a multiple angles that they might be seeing from other municipalities, and that they need to hold a hard and fast line on forcing libraries to open in the fall.
I can't see, I think Jonathan brings up a good point. I can't see any state agency drawing a hard line in the sand for Dayton if we show that we have a plan in place to mitigate the issue or the problem. And it's a plan that actually has substance.
I would hope so. My heart kind of fell when I talked to her because
Right.
that wasn't the first message that I got.
Yeah.
And again, with the pandemic and so many different scenarios playing out across the state and how different municipalities are treating their town employees, they might be giving that hard line, and we, knock on wood, we haven't had that problem here.
Okay. Did you have something?
So, yeah, like, I mean, to that point, I mean, I think we have to hope that they're flexible, but plan for them to be with it. And like, I'm offering a full service, being prepared to offer a full service library by Labor Day. Could there be things where we split up different parts of the library, like having the adult section stay on the main floor, of the current library? And I mean, we know, just as an example, that the modules at prime time can't hold the weight of the entire library. Can part of an area hold part of it?
I'd have to get under it, assess it and see what the needs were. Yeah.
Or could, just throwing it out there, could the conference room on the lower level of town hall become a very temporary children's room? Like, in that way, we would have a fully open library while we go forward with this lease process and bidding and everything else.
I can, I'll keep those things in the back. I'll attend the commissioners meeting next week.
Okay.
And see what is announced, what isn't announced, and I can be quiet if you want, or I can.
I don't think it's time to be quiet.
No.
If I can suggest it, I'm throwing this out there on behalf of our library, but if it would even help for whether it's building commissioner or the TA or the ADA coordinator, or all of the above, or any of us to go with you to that meeting and to potentially help if need be, plead a case or try to make a case for, if the context is, this is the reason, this is the issue, it's not just the pandemic. There's more involved here. If we can present a mitigation plan, if we can do this, if we can do that, what leeway do we have? And if it makes sense for any of us to help our librarian plead the case.
I don't know what's on the agenda yet, so I don't want to waste your time, but it wouldn't be unreasonable for me to attend, because, it's my universe, but,
Yeah, I mean, thinking about public meetings, and I mean, sometimes we like to see things that we call public meeting too, at least I like to, if there's a consideration of this actually happening, if we could get to Dayton's representative or like liaison the staff present at the MVLC to, basically ask for some flexibility in terms of how a final policy conversation
Yeah,
will happen. I think that is, could be viewed as a potential best way rather than, trying to make a case at a meeting where sometimes, as we know, once you get to a meeting, sometimes the lines are already drawn in the sand type of thing.
right, no, and the former director of sales is now on the
Okay,
board of commissioners, so I can get in touch with her,
okay.
but I don't think an agenda has been
Okay.
created.
Jocelyn, I think a conversation with her might be a
Yeah.
good thing to do.
She was in my site anyway.
Yeah, especially where we have funding for the project already. And if we didn't have funding already set up, it would probably, go away. But it's all timing, and we have the money for it. It is a project that is going to happen for that building.
It's just, we're in conference week this week.
So-
it's just been.
Yeah, Robert, I'd like you to weigh in on the discussion so far about potential for leasing space. I know you're on the capital side and the finance committee side. Can you give your opine?
Yeah, so we haven't been too involved with regards to what it would take to lease a building. And I can't remember the last time the town was in a position to or put into a position to consider leasing a building. It's been a few years, I know. It's what I would say is this, that the finance committee, it has, and in particular, the capital outlay committee, it has backed what we need to do to keep our library open. It is a service to the people of this town. There has been a lot of hard work put into keeping that thing running, given all the different positions that they've been put in. And, I have nothing but praise for Jocelyn and her team and what they've been able to do in light of all the handcuffing that has occurred due to all of our obligations. But if it's, I would agree with what Jim said in regards to any type of a trailer solution, that it's expensive. It's just an interim solution. I don't, for me personally, I wouldn't want to see us do this and move the library into a location like Primetime and invest money in renovating that quote unquote building to come up to code to be able to support it if it's just a short-term solution. It just doesn't make sense to basically be throwing money away. So if the short-term solution is finding an appropriate building to lease for the short term until we can identify a long-term solution and secure, grant money as well as, funding from the townspeople, then I think that is a good viable solution to pursue.
Okay, thank you, Robert. That was important feedback. So I have go ahead.
Just a quick question, based on the trajectory and the timing of this, Robert. So, understanding the timeline we're dealing with, basically, probably, likely if we continue down the path we're discussing, putting, something out to bid for at least over the summer. Do you think it would behoove of us, once we go to the Board of Selectmen, and then based on how they weigh in, then follow that up with a meeting of the FinCom, just really to get FinCom buy-in for the lease payment, that would essentially be finalized once we potentially have a lease.
Yeah, I mean, I think that makes perfect sense. I mean, let's get the Board of Selectmen to agree to what we're doing, then get FinCom on board with how we can finance it.
Right.
And then, let's pursue it. And maybe, honestly, depending upon what we find out, we may have to have a special on it. I don't know. It's just, and things have to fall into place for us, right? We have to.
So if the RFP went out, it would have to be subject to funding, right? Because you would do it in between town meetings, correct?
Yes, yep.
And then you wouldn't actually be able to execute a lease with anyone if it were in the affirmative by all parties until it went to the townspeople. Because now that's a raise and appropriate article, correct?
Yes. Well, it could be anything based on how the FinCom wants to recommend.
Would you, and I know this is a from the hip question.
It is operational.
Would you've been funding the bond payment for the police station out of free cash. Would you consider a lease payment out of free cash? Or would you, because we haven't set the bond in motion yet?
Like arguably though, this would become an operational expense.
Okay. So what does that do to the
Raise and
to the
appropriate.
levy? What does that do to the levy limit? For this fiscal year? Because if it requires an override, you'll never get it.
I think it all depends, honestly, how we define the levy limit too. We define the levy limit as not actually having any debt really being taxed. We have all of our debt included rather than being excluded. Anyway, so technically, I think we have room. But it's really, it's all a question of how we would fund it though. Does that make sense, Robert?
Yeah, it does all depend on how we fund it. And it also depends on, the special articles that we're funding both now and that we have asked departments to put off until the fall, until we do get our final numbers. I guess the question really becomes, it's hard for me to really make a clear statement here without knowing, are we talking about a lease that's going to be $5,000 a month or $25,000 a month?
That's right.
Yeah.
It's going to be between 8,000 and 10,000 a month if you go with the square footage that has been discussed.
Okay. So for us to sustain that for any length of time, to just go with the high number, you're looking at $120,000 a year.
Yep.
Okay. And my initial take on this is, if that's the route we choose to go initially, then I would venture to say that one suggestion that would come up is to and I think we have to put it to vote at town meeting, would to reallocate that $105,000 for the work at the existing building towards the lease payment. That's one option.
So I'm gonna respond to that, and you'll probably be surprised when I respond. I actually think that 105,000 needs to go to save the Carnegie building. That building cannot be used for anything else once the library vacates without the secondary egress, without the accessibility upgrades. It just can't be used. And I think we would be, I would be embarrassed to support something that pushed aside a Carnegie building that was donated to us because we were trying to rub nickels together to make this work. I understand, Robert, and I completely agree with you. It's always good to use money we already have appropriated, but it does nothing to help us repurpose that building, which I think has to be part of this discussion.
So, and I'm not going to disagree with you on that, Jim. I would, it's a beautiful building. I love driving by that building. What all I'm saying is that it is a way to put off that spending until it's needed. And I'm not saying that it may not have, it may just happen 6 months from now that we have to go ahead and do it because we have identified a need for it. But what it does is it helps to relieve the burden on the taxpayers immediately. And in no large part, this is a lot of this is due to the fact that we had sprung on us a $260,000 assessment from our school district. That was not what the finance committee and the town had agreed to with the school committee last year. And so we probably wouldn't be having this conversation right now if it weren't for that $260,000. But that's neither here nor there. It's happened. We are obligated to pay the school district for it, for that assessment. And so we have to be creative in how we come up with this money. And
So-
I am by no means saying condemn that Carnegie building. I am in full support of revamping that building to all its glory and finding some use for it. And I'll just leave it at that.
All right, so your point is well made. I think though, so let's say, right. So let's say that happens and it gets you, depending on how the RFPs come back, it gets you maybe a year, maybe just short of a year's lease payments for the library. We need to look at other funding sources for the Carnegie building. Do we go with CPC funding? Do we go with a transfer from the capital fund? And do we include an all-encompassing project where it's more than just the ramp and the accessible restroom, and we renovate the building to be repurposed for something else? Do we go that route? I don't want to scare the taxpayers away from any of this. I want to come up with a viable plan that makes sense, that says, in the end, Mr. and Mrs. Taxpayer, it's going to cost X amount of dollars per year to execute the lease. The library is going to have the space that it always needed and can function out of. And we have a plan to get the building that they vacated back into a usable state.
So the $105,000 that was allocated in November by special town meeting, was that CPC money or that was free?
That was
Why
free
can't
cash.
CPC funding should be able to fund, oh, actually ramp and egress.
Didn't we miss the application deadline? or
That-
something?
it-
They have
yeah.
like a weird,
They have the chief's spot on. We did discuss that funding source,
Yeah.
but because of
So
the,
if we reappropriated though, the 105, it's not like we don't have a funding source for the egress and accessibility. Really, all it is, we would rely on CPC, which arguably should be used more than raise and appropriate anyways.
That makes sense, perfect sense. We still need the taxpayers to reallocate the special article
Yes.
to transfer it into a lease payment.
Yep.
Or a portion of a lease payment, depending on what the RFP comes back at.
Yep.
And then we need to do an application with CPC,
Yes.
which I think, and I don't want to bite off more than we can chew, I think this committee is the perfect venue for identifying projects and then moving through the application process, or at least get the ball rolling.
Yep.
So I would agree.
So then the only other challenge we'd have is, I mean, okay, if we've dealt with year one, how to fund the lease, but that lease is gonna be recurring. We're not gonna have an article to reappropriate every year to be able to fund this thing either.
Right, and I've already asked Jocelyn what her operational expenses are for utilities. It's not a lot of money. We're not gonna have a surplus in her operating budget. There's a few $1,000s there, but it certainly isn't enough to offset the lease payment.
No, we're still gonna have to insure the building and all that, so there's no,
You have to insure the contents.
there's no safety.
No, oh, you mean the building that right.
Yeah, so this $110,000-$20,000 is gonna be on top of all the existing obligations that we're just gonna have to plan for and forecast.
Right, but the plus side of this is the library discussion is off the table now. Wherever space you go to, it's gonna be spec'd out to meet the needs that you've presented and that your trustees agree to, and you're actually gonna have a functional library without a $5 million investment.
Yep.
I'm not trying to sell it, I'm just trying to, it makes sense.
Yeah, no,
I just don't see what the other option is.
I don't either.
I personally, we don't have another town building that we can put them in.
Without stuffing you somewhere, which is what you don't deserve.
Yeah.
And I don't even know that we have that. I mean, the community room is a good idea for a temporary place for your kids,
Very,
Set up.
very.
but very temporary.
It's not long term, by
I
any
mean, now you'd be in 3 different places. I'm not laughing, it's just,
It's a tough thing to move on.
yeah.
Now, this would be a temporary thing, and
I don't think it's-
I'm sitting here listening to it, and I'm thinking, okay, you're spending $120,000 a year to lease a building, and you can build a building, and you would be paying $120,000 a year if it's a permanent solution. You
Oh,
know,
no,
how
you would.
long-
The debt exclusion on a new building is probably $300,000 a year
Yeah,
or more.
Well, on
but
the
eventually
lease,
the building is paid for.
I'm sorry?
Eventually the building is paid for.
after 20, 30 years.
Yeah,
Right,
yeah.
yeah.
So for 20, 30 years.
So our debt service on the police station this year is $380,000.
Right. Yeah, it's a great point, because there'll be other people who think
That's
that
gonna be
way.
a
I
question.
agree with you.
Yeah,
Well, we haven't been able to build one yet.
I know. I know that
So it's not like you haven't tried,
too.
you know? The other thing too, I think everyone should know, because you asked if it's a temporary solution. I'm guessing that you won't put up the capital to build out the space that you want to move into, which means it's going to be written into the lease. And to be written into the lease, no one's going to write a lease term for less than 10 or 15 years. 20 years is usually the lease term for a capital investment that a property owner needs to do for a build out that expensive. So otherwise, if you do the short of the term, they need to recoup what the money they put in, then the lease payment becomes
Right,
not
yeah.
tangible.
So like at this point, I mean, we have a path forward that I think requires a lot of work, and we're not adverse to doing the work. But I think up front we need to know oh, you know, how the board of selectmen, like, oh, and then FinCom really, oh, we need their buy-in, oh, like, in order to move forward.
And do you need a rough estimate ahead of that to say, you know, when you approach the potential lease areas, or what the estimated cost might be?
Well, I think the only way you're gonna find out what the hard number is to put the RFP out. You won't get it. If there's only 2 buildings in town that are accessible that may have a play in this, they're not gonna give you a hard number. They're gonna want a chance at winning the bid.
Yeah.
So I gave you a guesstimate off the cuff. It could be a little less than that. It could be a little more. I don't know, but that's a decent estimate.
Jim, what happens if neither one of those 2 owners come forward?
And we're back to square one. We're back to square one.
Yeah.
That's why I think the town needs to make it attractive enough where a property owner is gonna be willing to make that investment and have them as a tenant. And Robert, I agree with you, it's not common, but my business takes me to 140 different cities and towns. There are towns that lease space for certain services, so it's not that uncommon. I have visited different departments in different communities that are in leased buildings,
The
So-
Fall River branch libraries used to be leased.
right?
So the NBLC might not have an issue with the lease space.
No, but, they're both closed now, so I don't know, the South End branch closed really soon after it opened, and then.
It was open for a long time, because that's the branch I used to
No, they
visit.
moved, they moved.
Right.
to
No,
a
right.
location.
But it was in the lease space for quite some time.
Right,
Yeah,
but they
right.
moved.
That's the branch I used to visit.
Rob, does this path at least, like advancing the conversation to the board of selectmen and to FinCom, does this make sense with you?
Well, I don't think we really have a choice, honestly. The library provides services to the townspeople. In light of the fact that we're opening up due to COVID, we have that building can't open without these changes being made to it, based upon what our building inspector and what our fire chief have said, and I'm in agreement with them. It's the safety of the townspeople that come into play here. So yeah, I mean, we are definitely at the point where I believe the Board of Selectmen, in conjunction with the Finance Committee, need to weigh all the alternatives and pursue this.
Okay.
Okay, so I think in summarizing, there are gonna have to be some sacrifices made all across the board. I think hopefully the selectmen, I mean, I think this committee is unanimous. We simply don't have any options. And if presented in that fashion, based on the fact that we have an accreditation issue up against us, which I don't want to use as a mechanism, because this discussion needed to happen anyway, but it's here.
But I think this longstanding issue, I mean, this was gonna rise to the surface eventually.
Right, and it's here. But I also think, the other sacrifice needs to be that the MBLC is gonna say, if Dayton has actually found a path to deal with the library, long-term issues, they're gonna have to work with us, because I don't see this all happening by Labor Day.
I'll do what I can, but I don't,
Well, it may be a letter that's authored from the selectman or the town
let
administrator.
me see what I can do, and
Yeah,
So yeah, how I can help you guys to just help make sure they know that this isn't a situation where the library is just out on its own. There is a broader group really looking at this and working with the library to I'll actually advance and address this issue. I think it would be extremely helpful, actually for them to know that as well. Like, this isn't just that you want one, you want one, you'll support.
Yeah, no, I just.
If I may.
Yes, Chief.
There was a thought that maybe because of this closing, that CARES Act money might be able to assist. Has that been investigated and looked into as far as because of some of this? Actually, a large portion of this is due to social distancing, sanitization, and that type of thing. Is the CARES Act money available? Have we got an answer to that?
That is on my list this week. I just really need to put a very convincing pen to paper.
Okay.
So I can actually outline it out, because I know as soon as I broach it, I'm gonna be asked really to follow up with a narrative.
Right.
And I really wanna make sure, we're starting from a very strong narrative point. So that is.
Sure. I'm just thinking if the CARES Act could even just fund the first year,
Yep,
then we keep the 105 for the Carnegie building,
yep.
and then we are in a place where we can figure out how to do it the second year and whatever, for the length of it.
Yeah, and if we can address the build out, just as an example, right up front, rather than dealing with it, throughout the course of the term of the lease.
Right.
I can send you some of the grant narrative that I wrote for, when I was trying to get the
Perfect, yes,
bookmobile sort of stuff.
yeah,
It's a year old now, but
it's all, yes, that'd be,
Yeah, I will send you some of the things that I've compiled
okay.
through all my grants, if you like, for buildings.
Yeah, I have worked with Jocelyn. She's done everything she could to get any money that's available. The roof on that building was paid through grants, the chimney replacement.
Not the roof came before me.
Okay, the chimney was paid for the
The
grant, was it?
chimney paid for the chimney.
Yeah, I don't know where the fire alarm money came from. Was that a grant
No,
or
the
CPC?
town, I think the town did, you
Okay.
guys
Okay,
pressed the issue, that might have been.
but you have tried your best, I agree.
So Johnson, if we can work on the youth read all tomorrow.
I will after. Maybe 11:30.
I'll talk to you.
Okay. So, Mike, it's going on 5 o'clock.
Yeah.
The selectmen have asked for an update at each meeting about the library.
Is that?
What are you looking from this committee to bring to the selectmen for the next meeting? Are you looking, it seems like we made a pretty solid decision based on the facts, and it's unanimous.
Yep.
Do we want to bring this to the selectmen at the next meeting? Do we want to marinate on it?
I think if it's possible for the selectmen to hear what from the committee on 26, that these are what are the issues we explored, and the only viable alternative at this point is going down this path, and we think this path is viable, it addresses a need, and we just would like their blessing as we start this path to know that they support and believe in it, and then once we do that, then we can have a conversation with the FinCom shortly thereafter as well, just so everybody's on the same page at the outset and knows what to expect. I mean, as much as we can expect, we're all on the same page.
Do you need a motion or anything to say that that's the route we want to go?
I think if we're going to author a letter, then we will need a motion to do that. Yes. I would think it would be beneficial if that was presented to the selectmen, if you could try to find out if the MBLC is going to work with the town. If we go down that path, it may help the selectmen in gathering support for it. Otherwise, if we're back at the same Labor Day deadline, I mean, I don't know, what do we do? No?
I'll do what I can. I mean, they haven't even asked anything yet, and they might not by that time.
So I'm just thinking of, we can update the selectmen on the 26th. Get their pulse, but the MBLC is not meeting until what?
June 3rd.
June 3rd, so the selectmen meeting on the 9th.
Okay,
Maybe the official recommendation from this
Okay.
committee can come on the 9th at that point.
so would you just give a verbal update?
Yeah.
To the selectmen, and then on the 9th, we'll actually, all right, I think that's a great idea, because I just noticed the 26th is next week.
Yes, and yeah, and there's a lot of other stuff to put together too.
Yeah.
So that gives us really time, I think, practically speaking.
Okay. All right, so if we want to work, act on a motion to draft a letter directly to the selectmen from this committee, we'll circulate that amongst the committee members, so that we can come up with a final letter that will be submitted for the June 9th meeting.
I move to do what you just said.
That motion was moved by Mr. McGee, seconded by Chief McGee. Roll call, all in favor, Mr. Mullen?
Yes.
Mr. McGee, yes. Chief McGee?
Yes.
And yes, okay. Thank you. Oh, I'm sorry, Robert. Yay or nay?
I'm a yes.
Okay, thanks. Thank you, everyone. Thank you for joining us. It was important to have your input, all three of you. And this is exactly what I wanted to do. It took a couple of hours, but I wanted to make some progress, and we did that, so.
Just in closing on the other side of it, why we were second, first part, we're just gonna get the committee together to be able to make progress and to
Yeah, I'm gonna,
accumulate information.
yeah, I'm gonna work with some of the clerical staff that we have available to us to get this in electronic format, something that tangible that we can work with.
Yeah,
And then, yeah, I'll send an email out to everyone to discuss when we want to get together next to start working on this, okay? In the meantime, we'll circulate a draft letter that we can all put our comments onto and have it ready for the 9th.
Okay.
Very good.
One quick question, Mr. Chairman. For planning purposes, do we want to look at our calendars now, or we just gonna converse over email to set up the next meeting date?
I think we should wait if that's appropriate. Everybody's okay with that?
That's fine.
Okay. Okay. Robert, you okay with that? Waiting to set our next meeting date?
Yes.
Okay.
Okay.
All right. Thank you. Any more public input? No? Okay.
Make a motion to adjourn?
Motion made by Mr. Mullen, seconded by both McGee's. Roll call. Robert Rendon, roll call.
Yes.
Mr. Mullen,
Yes.
Mr. McGee,
yes.
Chief McGee,
Yes.
and I'm a yay. Thank you, everybody. Thank you for everything. Keep our fingers crossed.
Nothing like this problem, right?
This is the most progress we've made in a long time.
Good job.